What's up everyone? GameDad here, and I am back with a brand new video, and this time I am starting kind of a new series on the channel because I'm not sure how many of you know this, but one of the things that I actually have the most fun collecting for the collection isn't necessarily all the games. It's actually finding all the cool accessories and controllers that are out there. I know there's a lot of different controllers you can find out there that have different skins and stuff like that, but I like finding more of the weird and eccentric stuff. So in today's video, we are actually going to take a look at all of the different Atari kind of controllers that I have, plus a few miscellaneous things. But before we dive into the different controllers I have for Atari and a few of the other miscellaneous consoles, please be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons down below, as well as that little notification bell so that you get an alert every time I got a new video coming out. Now let's go ahead and dive in and check out these controllers. Alright, so first up we have the classic. That is the Atari Joystick controller. It's got that nice one button on there. It's got that joystick action. And honestly, they did not really stand the test of time. It is a controller that works, but honestly, this thing is very old. I mean, at this point, it's what, 40 years old? So, very old controller. It's still really stiff, and it works, but there are definitely modern remakes of this controller that you can get that work a lot better and will still work on original hardware. Now next up is a staple of any home Atari collection, and that is the Paddle controller. So you have that nice spinning dial on there, it goes left and right, you got your button on the side for your actions, and what was cool about these is they were two controllers in one. Everything was built for, you know, all that awesome two-player action, whether you're doing Pong or whatever else, and these controllers are great. Now we're into one of the weirder ones. And a lot of people today might not know that back then, a lot of games you actually had to program them yourself. They came with a little booklet, you would program it in, and then you would be able to play it. Well, on the Atari 2600, you were actually able to go in and you could do basic. But the only way that you could do it was with something like this, a keyboard controller. Now, you were able to put inserts and stuff over these to give you different key commands, and you could actually chain them together and have more than one keyboard controller. But with this, it just has a row or several rows of buttons on here. You'd go through, you'd program everything according to the booklet, and you could actually do basic programming using the basic programming language on the Atari 2600. Now, the last Atari 2600 controller I have right here is the track and field controller. Very simple. You had a couple buttons, that way you could mash them, start running, then hit that big red button to jump that character. Now, moving on is the Atari 5200. And this is one of those controllers right there. Looks a lot more complicated. It's got all kinds of buttons on the sides. It's got buttons up at the top. It even has a pause button. That was a big deal back then. Has this really nice joystick. It's much looser than the 2600. It's got the number pad down here. That way you could have inserts to go over it for tons of different games. However, out of any controller that I have ever gotten, the 5200 controller is probably the worst one. Like, I like the overall design of it, but honestly, these controllers are trash, man. They break constantly. I have had to do so many repairs, and at this point I probably have about 20 of these controllers because eventually they just die and stop working, and apparently I like to hoard them. Now, the only other 5200 controller I have is actually this beast of a controller right here. This is the Atari 5200 Trackball controller. So named because it has a trackball. And this has a very nice arcade feel. It's got a really good spin to it. And then on either side, for either player, you have your buttons, you have your numpads for your inserts, you have your start, pause, and reset, all that stuff. And this thing is big and bulky, just like the Atari 5200. And I mean, actually, I think this controller itself is bigger than the 2600. That just goes to show you that, you know, bigger wasn't always better. All right, now, the next Atari was the 7800, and while you could use 2600 controllers on it, I actually found a project years ago, and I believe I did a video here on the channel about making it, but I made this Atari 7800 controller that's very NES style. It was a custom kit that I bought. It plugs right into your 7800 and it gives you the feel of using an NES controller. So you got your D-pad, you got your two buttons, and honestly, this is by far my favorite way to play any 7800 game because it feels more, modern, even though this style of controller was, back in the 80s. All right, now the last Atari controller that I have is actually the Atari Jaguar controller. And this thing is chunky, and I don't really like it. It's not very comfortable. I mean, they had a little bit of ergonomics going on with like the profile of the controller, but they still had the stupid number pad on it, even though it was a 64-bit console, do the math. But it's got a D-pad, it's got a pause and option, and ABC, even though it goes CBA, which is kind of weird that goes up and away. But yeah, I mean, it's okay. I would definitely like to find some more like Atari controllers, just weird stuff that's out there. I know game companies at that time, they did a lot of strange stuff with peripherals, and finding controllers for any of these systems is just, it's fun. I don't know what it is. It's such a random thing to be able to find and collect for, and it's exciting to see what companies thought customers would actually like back in the day. Now, next up, it is Atari related, but it is not an actual controller, but that is the Atari Jag Link. This allowed you to do like link play with two different Atari Jaguars, so it was pretty cool. It was just a little interface to go between two consoles. That way you could do, I guess, like LAN parties, but without a LAN and just two Jaguars. All right, now on to some more of the random stuff. Right here we have your classic Turbo Pad, and that is your TurboGrafx 16 controller. You got those turbo buttons on the side, you got your 1 and 2, you got your select, your run, your D-pad, all of that, and just a nice classic TurboGrafx controller. Dig this controller. And then an accessory that I had found not that long ago, actually, is the Turbo Tap. So this allowed you to hook up 5 different controllers off of one controller port. That way you could get that multi-tap going for sports games and stuff like that on the TurboGrafx. Now up next is one of 2 3DO controllers I have, and this is just the nice regular 3DO kind of gamepad. And I mean, it's got all kinds of little toggles and stuff all over it, tons of different buttons, and just like most 3DO controllers, there was only one port on the console. So if you wanted 2-player, you plugged it into the top of player 1. So I always found that kind of interesting, that why they would want to do that instead of just putting another port in. I don't know. It was already an insanely expensive console. You think they could have just added another port. But that is my 3DO gamepad. And then the only other 3DO controller I have, I'm not going to take it out of the box just because I don't want this to get demonetized, but that is the GamePew. I'm going to kind of cover it up, that way YouTube don't get mad at me. But this was for the American laser games. So things like Mad Dog McCree, Bounty Hunter, stuff like that. So this was a light pew-pew for different games and stuff like that on the 3DO. Really like fun, kind of old arcade style, shoot the duck and metal pins fall and like all kinds of stuff. It reminds me of old arcade games like that, but you could do it at home. All right, now last up are controllers that I have for a rather obscure console, but honestly, it's one of those, it's so bad that it's good, but then there's also stuff on it that's just really, really bad. But the first one here is the CDI, the Philips CDI. This is the gamepad for it. And honestly, one of the things that this really has going for it is the cord is so stinking long. This thing has like a 12-foot cord. It's absolutely insane. So, they really didn't want you too close to the screen to see just how awful the graphics were. And the last controller for this video is another CDI controller. I don't know what it was supposed to be called. It says it's the RV8701. It's kind of like a weird like TV remote kind of thing. Got a couple of buttons, got like this like sort of analog joystick button sort of thing in the center of it. And it's actually required to play a few different games. Like, I think it was one of the Zelda games is actually a lot easier to play with this controller. And then there are some games that require a controller like this. I don't know why, but I mean, yeah, it's definitely a weird and unique controller, that's for sure. It looks like a very strange like TV remote almost. So there you have it, everyone. Those are all of the Atari and kind of miscellaneous console controllers that I have. Now, this was just showing a one-off of each of these controllers. For nearly all of them, I actually have multiple revisions and different things like that. Sometimes the model numbers are slightly different, but the controllers still look the same, maybe just like an updated revision that came out. But I really like collecting the older stuff because it was such a random time where they just kind of threw everything at the wall and tried to see what would stick. Now, I will have more controller collection videos coming on the horizon, but for now, let me know down in the comments below. What did you think of today's video? Do you have any weird, random Atari controllers in your collection? Or for any of the other consoles that I mentioned, like the CDI, or the 3DO, or the TurboGrafx, anything like that? You have anything cool for those? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, please be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, as well as that little notification bell. That way you get an alert every time I've got a new video coming out. Lastly, if you're interested in helping to support the channel, please be sure to check me out at patreon.com/GameDadShow. Now, as always, I'm GameDad. I thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you later.